If you've ever sat in a room full of voices and felt completely alone, you're not broken. You're simply awake. Most people don't notice the absurdity of modern social life because they've never questioned it. They laugh on cue, nod at cliches, and play the game without ever wondering why they're playing at all. But if you've ever found yourself silently thinking, "This isn't real," then you've touched a truth most refuse to face. This video isn't for the comfortably numb. It's for the quietly observant. Arthur Schopenhauer, often called the philosopher of pessimism, didn't sugarcoat the world. He believed that most human behavior was driven by illusion, by fear, by the desperate need to belong. People don't speak their minds. They speak what will be accepted. They don't live authentically. They live to avoid rejection. The masks we wear are so convincing that even we start to believe they're real. And that's where the trap begins. Not in the pretending, but in forgetting that we're pretending. Have you ever smiled when you didn't want to? Laughed at a joke you didn't find funny? Stayed in a conversation that felt like mental static? That's the cost of conformity. A slow erosion of your essence. Social life demands constant compromise, and with each nod, each forced politeness, you give away a little more of yourself in exchange for nothing but surface-level acceptance. The question is, when does this cost outweigh the reward? Schopenhauer believed that the more intelligent a person is, the more they suffer in society. Not because they are arrogant, but because they see too much. They see the hollowness behind the chatter, the emptiness behind the gatherings, the insincerity masked as politeness. They sense that most people don't want truth. They want comfort. And truth, especially when unfiltered, makes others uncomfortable. The more awake you are, the lonelier the room becomes. But here's the paradox. While intelligence may alienate you, it also gives you the power to step back. Most people live on a stage, performing roles they didn't choose, in scripts they didn't write. They believe they're free, but they're bound by the gaze of others. Real clarity comes when you no longer seek applause, when silence becomes more meaningful than conversation, and solitude becomes a sanctuary instead of a punishment. At first, this solitude can feel like exile. You may ask yourself if you're defective, if you're missing some vital social instinct. But over time, something shifts. You begin to see solitude not as absence, but as presence. A space where your thoughts are no longer diluted by noise. In solitude, you finally hear your own voice, uninterrupted. And that is a kind of freedom most people will never know. This is not a call for misanthropy. It's not about hating people or avoiding relationships. It's about intention. When you choose who you allow into your world, when you decide which conversations are worth having, you take back control. You stop offering pieces of yourself in exchange for approval. You realize that intelligence doesn't need permission to be itself. And that's when you become dangerous to a world built on conformity. And something interesting begins to happen. The less you seek validation, the more powerful your presence becomes. People sense that you are not easily swayed, not easily impressed, that your worth isn't negotiable. You become an anomaly, a person who doesn't depend on attention to feel alive. And in a world starving for authenticity, that kind of self-containment becomes magnetic. Schopenhauer saw that the world fears silence because silence forces reflection. That's why society is built on noise, constant stimulation, shallow entertainment, endless opinions. Anything to keep you from pausing long enough to see the cracks. But when you choose silence, when you sit with your thoughts instead of running from them, you begin to dismantle the illusions. You stop playing a game you never agreed to join. There's a vital distinction between solitude and isolation. Solitude is a decision. It's power. Isolation is desperation. It's the consequence of trying to fit in and failing. But when you step into solitude by choice, you're no longer at the mercy of others' opinions. You begin to attract those who value depth, who don't fear silence, who aren't addicted to superficiality. The path becomes narrower, but infinitely more real. Most people confuse popularity with connection. They believe having many friends means they're not alone. But if you look closely, you'll see that many with full calendars and loud rooms still feel hollow at night. That's because true connection doesn't come from being surrounded. It comes from being seen. And being seen, truly seen, only happens when you stop performing. Most are too afraid to stop the show because they fear the silence that follows. But the silence is where the truth lives. Schopenhauer didn't retreat from the world because he hated it. He stepped away because he understood it too clearly. He saw that most social interaction is built on repetition, not reflection. We're taught to mimic, not to question, to fit in, not to stand out. And when you reject that script, you no longer speak the same language. That's not arrogance, it's liberation. To no longer need the noise is to finally hear what matters. You'll notice that people who crave acceptance the most are often the ones most rejected. Why? Because desperation repels. But those who detach from approval, who move with calm certainty, become impossible to ignore. That's the paradox. True belonging begins when you stop chasing it. When you stop needing others to affirm your worth, the right people start appearing, not because you begged, but because your presence speaks for itself. Intelligent minds are not antisocial. They are selective. Da Vinci didn't share every thought. Nietzsche didn't seek applause. Tesla worked in near isolation. Were they strange? Perhaps. But strange to whom? To those who fear depth? To those who flee silence? The greatest revolutions were not born in crowds. They were born in quiet rooms where one person dared to think differently. Greatness rarely screams. It whispers, waits, and acts with precision. Society feeds you one myth from birth: that to be loved, you must be seen, liked, accepted. But no one tells you how many betray themselves in the process. You weren't born to fit a mold. You weren't made to be agreeable. You were meant to discover what truly resonates with you and to follow it, even if no one else understands. That's the difference between existing and living. One follows the script, the other writes it. Don't mistake this for a rejection of humanity. It's a rejection of artificiality, of shallow praise, of empty noise. When you pull back from that, you make room for something better: presence. People who don't need to talk to be understood. Conversations that nourish rather than drain. Moments that don't require filters, edits, or applause. This is not isolation. It's refinement. The pruning of noise to uncover something rare: peace. Most people spend their lives adjusting, dulling their edges, censoring their minds, shrinking their essence to fit into boxes. But the more you shrink, the more invisible you become. And eventually, you forget you were ever more than a shape others could accept. If that thought scares you, good. Fear is the first sign you're waking up. And once you see the pattern, you can't go back to sleep. There comes a point when trivial talk becomes intolerable, when shallow praise rings hollow, when you no longer crave the next invitation or smile politely at falseness. This is not bitterness. It's evolution. And evolution is never quiet. It shakes what's comfortable and forces you to walk alone before you find your tribe. But when you do, every step you took alone will have been worth it. Here lies the paradox that breaks most minds. The more you dare to be yourself, the more others follow. Not because you seek it, but because they crave what you found: authenticity, wholeness, calm. You become a mirror for what they're missing. And though some will resent you for it, others will silently shift just by watching you stand in your truth. That's influence, not by volume, but by presence. So now you know. You can go back to blending in, back to the noise, back to the play. Or you can begin something harder, something truer. You can accept the discomfort of your own voice. You can start listening to silence instead of escaping it. You can live for yourself, not for the crowd. Because in the end, there are two kinds of people: those who adapt to survive and those who evolve to lead. Which one are you?